And then, of course, every year, like, wages went up. I can remember my father telling about a very successful man in the neighborhood, and he'd like to point him out as a measure of success. And he'd say, well, look at him. He said, when he first came to this country, he worked for me for $125 a year. And here you go. So it,
you obviously, I don't think I'll get any argument from anyone in the room, did a great job of raising your children, because they went on to produce families
well,
of their
I
own.
never really agonized about it a lot.
What tips do you have on raising kids? What's the secret?
Well, what's the secret? I think in the first place they have to know they're loved, for one thing. And another thing, they have certain rules for them. I never spanked any of them very much. I think some of them never got spanked. But I think, well, I try to be reasonable with them, but never expected anything unreasonable. But I did expect them to behave in a certain manner.
What was the greatest joy for you in having raised, after your whole family was raised, the kids who had left home? Was it seeing them go on to have families of their own?
Yes, and seeing them become useful citizens and good citizens. That's what I say. I think that's the most important.
What was the biggest disappointment?
Not any of them really disappointed me. Freddie made me feel bad because he couldn't keep awake, and I knew he was unhappy about that, And towards the last, it was hard to see him unhappy, and knowing that nothing could be done about it, because he was a wonderful guy. I don't think a more unselfish person ever lived, Freddie. And he was very important to our family. He was the oldest one, and during the Depression, and he was really a mainstay in the support of the family. And he never was always happy to do it.
Yeah.
I don't.
You had quite a large family. Did you plan it that way?
No. Especially the last one was, I thought I was all through having babies, and then little Caroline comes along, and no one's ever been sorry. We've all enjoyed Caroline, and everyone accepted her and loved her from the start.
How many kids did you think you'd have?
Oh, I thought maybe 4 would be a nice family, and I'd double that.
Tell us a little bit about each of your children and what stands out in your mind as unique about their personalities, from oldest to youngest.
Well, I think Freddie was the oldest. He was a very handsome little boy. And the thing that stands out most about Freddie is his unselfishness and his concern for the whole family, which I think he showed when he died, when he left money to all his nieces and nephews. He loved them all alike, and I thought it was really a nice thing for him to do. And he just dearly loved, and Marjorie was just a year and a half younger, and he always just adored her. And when he'd get a piece of candy when he was a little boy, he'd give her the first bite. And she was a real sweet little girl, but much quicker than Freddie she was more mischievous. One thing we always laughed about was when Freddie, we lived in St. Cloud, and one day after a rainstorm, the 2 kids disappeared with the little girl next door, and we looked all over for them. We couldn't find them. And I began to get panicky, and the woman next door, because right across the road from us was the Mississippi and a steep bank, and we thought, well, did those kids play there? Well, when their dad came home at 6 o'clock, he went with the car and looked all over. No trace of those kids anywhere in the neighborhood. So then I called up the police station and asked if they had seen 3 little children who looked as if they didn't belong to anybody. Because they had been paddling in the mud. It had been after rain. And he said, oh yes, he had noticed 3 down in front of the post office. Now that was more than a mile from home. They had we had 3 blocks to go to St. Germain, which was the street that crossed the Mississippi. They'd crossed the bridge and were gone all through the downtown St. Cloud before they were found. Well, Daddy took them down to the basement, and he gave Freddie a good paddling, and Marjorie stood there with just as unconcerned watching it. And when he was through with Freddie, she marched up and got hers. He said he could hardly do it. She thought she had it coming. Well, I think they thought it was worth it, because every time we'd go down the street, Marjorie would say, oh, there's some cupies in that window, and they had gone, there was something else over on that side. So but I never forgot that, the worry we had and how much fun they had doing it.
So that's what stood out in your mind about Freddie.
Yeah, and Marjorie.
And Marjorie, how would you characterize Marjorie?
Well, she was always a very sweet little girl, and always wanted to do everything. And she broke her arm one time. She was not supposed to use it, and she wanted to do it. I can do that myself, and that's where we got that. I can do it myself, and she always was she and Freddie were much alike. They both felt a great deal of concern for the rest of the brothers and sisters.
And then the third
was Warren.
Warren. What sticks out in your mind about Warren?
Well, he was always kind of a humorous little kid.
In what way?
Oh, in many ways. One time he came into the house and he says, Mother, can I have a paring knife? And so I said, well, what do you want to do with a paring knife? Well, there was a worm out in the garden and he couldn't kill it. And then it was an angle worm, and he every time he'd try to kill it, the next people would wiggle off, And another thing, when we lived in Hutchinson, we lived in a duplex, and there was a little girl next door, Phyllis, who was a little bit older than me. And every morning they would go across the alley into the back door of a grocery store. And this man liked children, so every morning he would give them candy. They had pennies. They'd go over there to spend their pennies. And he'd give them candy, and then he'd give them their pennies back and bring them back tomorrow, So the same, they'd put the pennies on the windowsill, and the next morning they would go with their pennies again down to the... So one morning he was busy. Several days a week he would deliver, and he was busy delivering. And so... they decided that he didn't want them there. So he said, well, now he said, your children come home and go home now and come back later. And Phyllis turned to Warren and she said, I don't like the way he acts today. And then they went home, and I thought that was showing the ingratitude of children. So I thought it was really funny.
What about Dick? What stands out in your mind about Uncle Dick?
I don't know. What did Dick do? Was it different?
What kind of a kid was he?
Oh, he was always a harum-scarum kid. He was always a kid that had to have a bunch of boys around with him. They would always hang out around here, and his friends always meant so much to him, and they were really loyal. They are to this day. Any of them that are left, they're very loyal to each other. He always was a kind of a team boy. He was in all sports. Never really was too excellent at it, but he sure had fun doing it. He liked fun. In high school, he didn't distinguish himself. He never flunked. But anybody that got more than a C was a pansy, He just liked fun.
What about Lois?
Well, when I think of her, Dick used to get mad. We'd have pictures of her, and she'd always poke her head around, and Dick would, every little picture Dick thought was of him alone, she'd be in it somewhere. And he used to get so provoked at her. That's
what kind of a little girl was she?
Oh, she was naughty or anything. She and Marilyn kind of stuck together a little bit. And when they were little, before they were on school. But I don't know, at that time I guess it was getting pretty routine. I didn't. And the same way with Marilyn, I can't think of any, except that she was very, very careful of Caroline always, and I used to get provoked at her because Caroline needed a scolding once in a while. And every time I would scold Caroline, oh, she would run and put her arms around poor little Caroline, you know, and poor. So the scolding never had any effect, you know.
What about Owen?
Owen was a good kid. He had more patience than Marilyn or Lois. Whenever we had a garden at that time, and we would can beans and stuff. The girls never could sit still long enough to do anything. But Owen, he had a lot of patience always, and he'd help me with things like that. And he was always around, and he liked to embroider. He embroidered a scarf. He liked to do anything that anybody else did. He'd like to try it.
And finally, Caroline.
Oh,
what stands out in your mind about her?
Yeah, she was the pet of the whole family, you know. The family remembers most. I was canning beans one night, and I think Owen was helping me. And she was sitting in the window in the kitchen, and she leaned back and pushed the screen out and fell all from down to the concrete down below there. And of course, Owen ran out there and got her. I guess he was the first one there and picked her up, and she had her mouth was bleeding and so on. We looked, no teeth. And so we took her up to the dentist. There was a dentist living on University Avenue right back of us. Well, he said, they're in there. They're up. They had been pushed way up. He said, they'll come back. And they did. So.
Would you say that all of your children had very different personalities? They were all individuals?
Yes, they did. Now, I would say now, well, especially I noticed it was the first with Freddie and Warren. Freddie would try my patience and try it, and he needed a spanking about every 3 months when he was a little boy. But if I spanked Warren, he resented that. That was it did something to him that he didn't like it. You know. So I found out after I could never spank Warren. It would make him feel sullen, you know. But talking to would do more to that.
Many of us know all of the time that you put into crocheting and quilting and all the handwork. Where did you learn to do that?
Well, I tell you, most of it I had to learn myself. I never could learn from somebody else showing me. I had to have the written directions in front of me and follow it that way.
But is this something that you learned as a child? Did you pick it up when you had all these kids to kind of get away from everything?
No, I can remember my grandmother trying to show me how to crochet, and I couldn't learn until I got a book and learned by myself. I had to figure everything out for myself always, I think.
So it wasn't something that you started as a small child?
Oh, no, nobody taught me. And in fact, sewing, we never did any sewing. We always had in those days, seamstresses would come to the house. So the seamstress would come about 2 weeks in the spring and 2 weeks in the fall. My mother didn't have time to sew. So she did all the sewing for us. In fact, she was almost a family member. When they moved to town, she had a room with them. She really felt part of the family. I never made a dress for myself. My mother never made a dress for me. I made one dress for myself when I was teaching, and that was because Ida, our seamstress, had taken time off. She thought she was tired of sewing, and she was in the city learning how to do gourmet cooking. And then she forgot about that and came back out and sewed it. So that was one dress I made for myself, and I liked it too.
According to our calculations, in 1902, you were 10 years old.
Yeah.
Give us the typical day in the life of a 10-year-old in 1902. What time did you get up in the morning, and what was your day like?
I think I got up around 7 o'clock. We usually had breakfast at 7. And then we had to wash the dishes, my sister and I, before we went to school. And then I don't know whether we made our own lunch or if somebody made it. I think it was made for us. And we walked to school, which is over a mile. I had to be there at 9. In the wintertime, we'd go, we hauled cream. There's a little town there. So we could ride with when they hauled the cream. And then we'd spend the day in school. And school lasted till 4 o'clock. And then we got home and walked home. And then the one job we had in the night was to fill the wood box. We still had the little kitchen range burned to wood. So we had a wood box back of the stove. So my brother and I would have to fill that wood box, and that was about it.
Living on a farm, one would think that you would have to do a lot of chores. You say you didn't.
Except in the summertime when the men were out in the fields late. And then sometimes we did the chores, and we'd milk the cows in the evening if they'd work till 8 o'clock.
Why didn't you have many chores to do?
Because we had a hired man, and I had brothers. I did that. That was woman's. That wasn't man. That was man's work. That wasn't woman's work.
And your dad was pretty strict about that.
Oh, he didn't. He didn't want his women folks to be doing like working out in the field or anything like that. There were 3 sisters, and then my youngest, 4 of us girls at home always. But then,
and you got off easy on the farm chores, huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
Grandma, who is the person that you most respect in your life?
Well, I think my father.
Why?
Because he was a very honest man. Everyone in the whole county said, well, they thought he was the most honest man they had ever. And he was a very intelligent man, and he had his ideas about everything. And of course, they'd be pretty conservative nowadays. And he had a brother who was, father always was a Republican, and Uncle Bill was a Democrat. And every time election time would come around, we kids kept out of the way because they would argue. If you could hear them block away. We used to laugh about that. And he was a very progressive man. You see, he came when Minnesota was really, and he was always the first man to get the new machinery and for anything that made life easier on the farm.
Did you have a real close relationship with your dad?
Well, he was kind of a stern man, but yeah, I had sitting on one knee and Aunt Lou on the other, and he would sing songs to us. And the last time I saw my sister, we said, well, we sang those. We still remember these were German songs that he sang to us, and he'd go to this little town every afternoon to get the mail, and he always had a treat in his pocket for it.
He was a successful farmer, wasn't he?
Oh yes, he was a very and many years after I was married, I heard he was. I went to a bridge party in Hector, and a woman said, "Well, your father is a banker." I said, "No, he's a." Well, doesn't he? But he was. I come to think of it, a lot of people would have called themselves bankers, but he never. He was a farmer. He was very proud of being a farmer, and but he had helped organize the Bank of Hutchinson in 1890, I think it was, and he was a director in that bank until he was 70. So I suppose that made him. That's why they called him a banker,
Did he ever give you any advice?
Well,
that you can recall?
He thought each one should make up their own mind. I told him one time, he was a very understanding man. We had made so many mistakes, and I said so to him. He said, forget about
mistakes in what way?
Oh, in the way we handled our business and whatever, and times when times were hard. And I said, we've made so many mistakes. forget about them. He says, I'm an old man and I'm still making mistakes. You just forget about them and go. That's what, he really,
So that was probably the best advice.
yes, he was always back of me.
What is the secret to living to be 95 years old?
I don't know. So, good health.
But how much does the mental attitude play in it? Is that
you
important?
see some people whose mental attitude is not to be desired. But I think having a positive outlook on life has a lot to do with it. I mean, to be able to enjoy life and so on. I think you have to never feel sorry for yourself. That's one thing.
When you wake up each morning, what do you think about that?
I think, well, what day of the week is this? That's not what I'm thinking nowadays. No, and I think, well, what is there going on for today? And then try to get myself organized.
But you're still very active. You in the church, and is that a key to a long life? Staying
yes,
active.
To be active, and not think about your aches and pains. There's nothing more boring than to be with people who are everlastingly talking about their aches and pains.
How important do you think it is that most of your family lives near you? Has that been a comfort as you've gotten
yes,
older?
Yes, it is. But of course, that is. I think that's just chance. You know, their lives. They're getting jobs there, and so on. But I think it's very nice to have them all close. I find it very helpful now when I do need extra help, or like Warren is always available to take me wherever. If I have to go to the doctor or go here or there, he's always available. Marilyn is always available for. She does my laundry for me, and it's very. I couldn't live here if I didn't have the family close around.
One last question. Is there anything else that you want to do in your lifetime that you haven't done?
That I haven't done, or that I would just like to do?
Just that you just would like to do.
Oh, I'd like to finish a few more needlepoint pictures.
I mean, you have no dreams of going to the moon or...
No, I have no... I'm just glad I can get out of bed in the morning.